Okay, so let's wrap this up with a little expansion of what I was talking about in the last segment, that oftentimes basic research becomes applied. Let's just stick with psychology for a second and talk about how brain research started off as basic research and now has grown into research that is much more applied. Okay, so basic research on the amygdala. Now, we've really only been having access to studying brains and trying to figure out what they do and stuff like that for about maybe 150 years, where people could dissect brains and things like that. And then, of course, if we talk about actually having access to what a structure is doing in a living person or animal, that's only been maybe 50 years, if I'm really going to be broad about it. So for a long time, for the first, 3/4 of that time, we've been just trying to figure out what the amygdala does. If you damage an amygdala, how does the rat's behavior change? If you activate the amygdala, how does the rat's behavior change? And that kind of research started to point us to the interpretation that there's a relationship between the amygdala and aggression. When you have overactivity in the amygdala, it seems to make the person or rat behave aggressively, and when you have underactivity, it seems to be associated with fear. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, and of course we're interested in just testing the theory of what does the amygdala do, and so that's really interesting, but it started to have applied purposes. Let me give you a couple of examples. One is from the 1980s. There was this guy who had been a sweet guy, completely, nice and loving and not aggressive. And over the course of time that he was dating his girlfriend, he went from, he'd have a blow up once a year to like twice a year to, once every couple of months to once a month and to every couple of weeks to pretty much, he was flipping out and getting enraged every day. And ultimately, he was arrested because he went into a rage and he nearly beat his girlfriend's daughter to death. She was only a couple of years old, 2.5, something like that, and he nearly beat her to death. And so, of course, he was arrested, and while he was in custody, he had a seizure, and so they did a brain scan on him, and they discovered a tumor was pressing on his amygdala. And the researchers, and actually at the time, we still did not know for sure that the amygdala was the key factor. They thought it was the hypothalamus. So they saw this tumor pushing on the amygdala, and then they thought that the amygdala in turn was pushing on the hypothalamus, and that was what was causing the aggression. One way or another, they were under the impression this tumor might be triggering the rage. So they removed the tumor, and he said after he woke up that it was like he was conscious for the first time, like the world looked like the right colors again and things, like everything looked different. He still had to go through the trial and everything, but his rage was gone. That's a really good application of the supposition that there was some kind of relationship between at least the limbic system and then aggression. Nowadays, we have kind of the flip side of research going on, applied research for people who have post-traumatic stress disorder of any sort. If you have a person who's undergone some kind of dramatic trauma, and then from that point on, they've been having inordinate fear responses, like anxiety attacks, in any situation that's even remotely like the one where the trauma occurred. Research is now sort of looking at the idea that a very dramatic traumatic event can cause a lesion in the amygdala and actually cause it to misfire and cause fear responses when normally it wouldn't. So these are applications of the things that we had seen tested earlier on with basic research. How about the causes of schizophrenia? We've gone through all these different variations of what causes schizophrenia. It started out, like 150 years ago, they thought there was something biologically wrong with people who had schizophrenia. Then Freud came along, and Freud said, no, it's bad parenting that makes schizophrenic kids. And so that was a happy time. And then now we're back to it's probably biological, but now we're looking at like genetics or other factors. One factor that's being examined is the possibility that exposure to the flu virus can cause the neurons that are growing in a baby's brain while the baby's in the womb to become sticky and not be able to migrate to where they belong in the brain. And one researcher has spent a number of years studying particularly the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of your brain that's involved in your conscious awareness at the moment. We think it's the seat of what we call working memory, which is pretty much whatever you're thinking about at the executive function, whatever you're thinking about at the moment. Research has shown that if you have if you expose brain cells to the flu virus during the time that the hippocampus is developing, you end up with a hippocampus that's disorganized. The neurons aren't wired up correctly. Okay, so it's possible that mom being exposed to the flu at about 6 months along in her pregnancy makes it a greater probability that her baby will grow up to develop schizophrenia than the normal rate in the population. It's not a guarantee, just FYI, in case you were pregnant and had flu. I don't want to freak you out. It's not a guarantee, but there's this link. So now what does that mean? That basic researchers have found this link. Well, one thing that's happened is now it's being applied. People are saying women who are planning to be pregnant should get a flu shot, so that if they do get exposed to the flu, they won't catch the flu, and then they won't have this issue with their baby having flu virus present while their brain's developing. So you start off with this basic research, trying to just figure out the roots of schizophrenia, and now it's having these applied factors. How about behaviorism? One of the things that therapists are really interested in is they have been applying the concept of classically conditioned learned helplessness to their clients and trying to help them to work through that learned helplessness so that they can get rid of their anxiety disorder. So behaviorists, who are very basic researchers, generated this idea that you could develop learned helplessness through classical conditioning. And then now therapists are applying that concept to treatment of their clients who seem to have anxiety disorder. How about if any of you have ever tried training an animal using clicker training? If you've never seen it before, there's a link here and you can watch a video to illustrate what clicker training is. But it's basically a combination of a combination of operant conditioning and classical conditioning. And it's really a quick way to teach a dog or a whale or a cat what the desired behaviors are. Works really well. It's an application of the principles that basic researchers discovered through behaviorism. So I'm belaboring this because a lot of times students get very categorical in their understanding of applied research and basic research. And I really want you to realize that a lot of times basic research finds applications at the hands of applied researchers. So they are not separate entities that never interact. Okay, the last complaint that I wanted to address is that complaint that too many of our studies in psychology use college students as our samples. We do use a lot of college students. You guys are easy to recruit. You're willing to work for extra credit. We hardly ever have money or anything good to offer. So yeah, college students are our most common sample. It's fine though, because if you think about it, if you're doing basic research and you've only just begun in a new field or there's not that much known about it, about whatever topic you're studying, this can be a really good starting point. If we can establish the basic principles on a homogeneous sample like college students, then that gives us the impetus to expand out to other samples. Also, some characteristics really are universal. I know we all like to think we're unique. My personality theory students always like to talk about, all of us are different. It's like, well, kind of in our, nuances, but there's a lot of universality also. We all sleep. We all have, certain kinds of stressors. There are a lot of things that can be very universal across people. Some characteristics are universal. So why not use the simplest sample to recruit in order to test these universal characteristics? Of course, if we find something interesting while studying college students, we can always replicate that study using some other sample. right? So once we establish that the thing works with college students, then we could say, I wonder if it would also work with sixth graders. I wonder if it would work with 85-year-olds. I wonder if it would work with people who are developmentally disabled. Would it work with people who are blind? I mean, right? We can start to extend it out to all sorts of different people. Of course, different types of people need to be recruited anytime that we have a hypothesis that has to do with some other kind of group, right? I mean, if you're going to be studying people with Down syndrome, you should probably recruit people with Down syndrome to study, right? That just makes sense. If you're interested in kids, recruit kids. If you're interested in the elderly, recruit elderly people. If you need to make sure that the racial backgrounds are balanced or representative of what's present in the population, you need to recruit for that. But if you're basically at a starting point and you're trying to figure out how this characteristic manifests itself in the population or whatever, it's fine to start with college students and then expand from there. All right. Well, that is all I wanted to say about Chapter 7. So the next time you hear from me, I'll be explaining Weekly Exercise 7.